yeah, I hear all that, but get me the best price.
Let's look at the price. Let's look at your contract.
Advocating for yourself and putting yourself forward so that you don't allow them to leave you behind.
And he was just laughing at me. I just cut him off and I said, look, I don't think you're in the right headspace to be speaking to me right now.
So there's a lot of emotional intelligence going on there in your interactions.
We'll take her baby to conferences and breastfeed on stage. She goes, I will do this. It's very difficult. She's very open about how difficult it is, but she's also very open with how committed she is to.
Hi, I'm Siobhan.
I'm Annabelle.
And I'm Anne.
And we are the Deal Divas, a podcast discussing all things negotiation.
Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Deal Divas podcast. We're delighted to have joining us today two female leaders in the tech space, Lily Siddiqi and Jess Poole. Both Lily and Jess work for an organisation called Vertice, and we thought it would be really interesting to have a conversation with them about their experience as female leaders in the tech space and to tell us a little bit about the challenges they come up against and some of the insights that they've gleaned over the time they've been working in this particular area. So I think if we just get right into it, and if I could begin by asking you just to introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name is Lily. As mentioned, I'm a procurement team lead here at Vertice. I take care of a team of commercial negotiators.
Okay. And Jess? Same.
Yeah. Perfect. Same from me. So my name's Jess and I'm a procurement team lead alongside Lily at a company called Vertice, looking after a team of commercial negotiators too.
Okay. And Jess, could you tell us a little bit about what Vertice does for any of our listeners who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, definitely. So Vertice is a spend optimization platform across both SaaS and cloud. So Lily and I really are focused on the SaaS purchasing side.
Okay. You're both in the same role. So maybe, Lily, if I could ask you, what is it about working in the tech space? We're going to come on a little bit later on and talk about the kind of the limited number of women really working in the tech space. So I'm interested to hear from both of you, actually. Maybe, Lily, if you can tell us, first of all, what is it you like about working in tech?
I love learning. So I feel like you get quite a lot of high exposure and I love the fast pace. So I get quite bored with anything else.
Okay. And Jess, what about you?
I think being in a space that you can be creative within is quite important to me, and also being challenged basically on a daily basis.
Okay, interesting. I'd like to hear, I'm sure our listeners would like to hear a little bit about your journey into where you are now. It was interesting. I was looking at some statistics from a Harvard Business Review, which said that there's only 19% of women in the tech space. And in fact, this morning, I was looking at a Forbes article which said that since the pandemic, the gender balance has become much more equitable in lots of industries, apart from in tech. And it was something like 32% of women in overall tech roles in 2019, but it slowly declined and is now down to something like 28% across the whole kind of tech sphere. And I'm interested, first of all, really, in two things. What was your journey into the tech space? And if you were talking to somebody else who was considering taking on the sort of role that you do and joining your industry, is there any advice you would give them? Have you got maybe a couple of pieces of wisdom that you might advise to another woman considering joining the tech space? So Lily, if I start with you first, and tell us a little bit about your journey in and then your advice.
So I started my career working in co-working, specifically a space for tech businesses to join as members, essentially. So I had a lot of exposure to meeting lots of different founders. We then also worked with a lot of venture capital funds and angels. So my early career was really absorbing all of that. It was very convenient for networking as well, which kind of led me to my following roles. And I've ended up here working in SaaS particularly.
Okay. And if you were talking to another woman who was saying, "Oh, I'm thinking about joining the tech workspace, but it's not, there's not a lot of women in there. And what advice would you give me as a woman entering that? What would you be saying to them?"
So to take it from my point of view, as not having really studied a STEM subject, is not to question yourself or your validity in that space. Just because you might not be taking on a technical role doesn't mean you have something to offer in that space. And on top of that, it doesn't mean you can't learn. I've had plenty of female friends within this industry who have come in with no technical experience and have gone on to train within jobs, go away and do a STEM master's. So really just being open to kind of learning more about those industries and being confident.
Okay. And Jess, what about you? A bit about your journey into the space and your advice.
Yeah, definitely. So I've only been in tech the last couple of years. Prior to that, and where I've spent the bulk of my career was in financial services. So again, maybe what's considered a more male-dominated industry. Obviously, the industry is doing very well to recruit and retain women, something that we're trying to do within the tech space as well. But I spent the bulk of my career within financial services at a global investment bank. And it came to a point when I wanted to be more creative within my particular role. I wanted to really feel like I was making a difference with what I was doing. So I started to think about what my next move could be. So given my financial services background, I started to explore the fintech space, given I thought that might have been a bridge for me to feel like I could add value kind of from the get-go within a tech organization. So I made that move. It was, I think, the best move I probably made. Still think it's the right decision for me. And I spent some time within a fintech, and then the opportunity at Vertice came up. And I wanted to really learn more about the industry itself, really understand the tech industry, specifically learn more about software and SaaS. And I thought, what better company to do that at than a SaaS procurement optimization company? And that's how I got here.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you about your advice as well, but I guess that the reading all of the statistics around women in the tech space, it begs the question, why? Why do you think it is that it's not so attractive to women, or that it doesn't, as an industry, retain female talent perhaps as much as it should?
Yeah, and I think this probably fits into my advice actually, because I think as women, we sometimes feel like we have to know everything or the vast majority of things before we enter a role. And that's really what message that I would really like to get out of this, is to say you don't need to know everything, and you don't need to know everything from the get-go. You just need to be prepared to learn and open to learning on the job. What I think this industry really thrives on is people from different perspectives, people from different backgrounds, really ideas to the table to innovate. What I think is that there may be a slight barrier for women with the more technical aspects, like Lily has said, which make them feel like that they may not be able to have the right level of expertise to make that difference. But from my perspective, like I said, I've only been in tech around 2-3 years, and I've progressed to a team lead within the organization already. So I think what you're good at, make sure that you're building that brand, and making sure that basically you're bringing your own skills to the table where you can add value and where you can make that difference. Make sure that you're shining there.
Yeah. I really resonate with what you say there. I was speaking on a negotiation panel at the We Are Tech Festival a few months ago, and it was amazing that there were some men there, but it's predominantly women, and there was a lot of discussion around the statistical difference between, men might put their hand up when they think they're good at the job, women wait too long and they want to be certain, they want to be sure before they present their ideas or put themselves forwards, and just talking about kind of advocating for yourself. But also in contrast to that, which I think supports what Anne was saying about the statistics that she was finding, is that there has been this discrepancy, this disparity between the opportunities or the career promotions and opportunities for females in the tech industry in specifically. There's quite interesting conversations hearing from women that have been in the industry like 10, 15, 20 years, where they were saying, people that are of a similar standard, or maybe they're even more experienced, they weren't getting promoted. And how do you build that brand, like you're saying, Jess, advocating for yourself and putting yourself forward so that you don't allow them to leave you behind. And you shouldn't have to fight that much harder, but unfortunately this seems to be what's happening in that industry in particular. As Anne mentioned, it hasn't progressed to the same extent as so many other industries. So it's really nice to hear you saying, like, advocate for yourself and, think what is your brand and push yourself forwards. And then hopefully the industry will keep changing in support of that. I know there's lots of different foundations and companies that are trying to support women in the tech industry in particular. But there's been like a significant grant cutting for some of those organizations recently, which is really concerning, like backward step for women in the tech industry. I don't know if that's something that you guys have heard about or that you've been affected by at all, or people you know.
So just to jump in here, one thing I'm super familiar with, and I've had the privilege of working with women who are very passionate about changing this, but I think the funding gap drives massively into why there might be less female leadership in the industry. Female founders tend to receive minimal funding. And I think because of like Jess said, women like to make sure that they're getting things right. Because it's a riskier industry, perhaps it attracts less women who are willing to kind of take the leap. So then you've got this kind of double whammy, and therefore you've got a lot of male tenured businesses with a lot of male leadership, and female founded businesses are few and far between, and that will tend to attract less female talent as well.
Yeah. And I remember when we were speaking before, Lily, you were saying that quite a lot of the founders that you were around in your early career were actually female. So you were kind of introduced with a totally different perspective. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that.
I was very lucky. I definitely was introduced to rose-coloured glasses. I was like, this is amazing, wonderful women supporting each other and supporting me early on in my career, particularly kind of female-focused angel investment funds as well, who would also only invest in other women. So it was quite a unique ecosystem to be in and to be surrounded by. And then stepping into this role where you meet a lot of leaders, you realize just how male-dominated the industry is. And I think if you don't have that base level of confidence in yourself and reassurance, that like Jess said, what you're good at and what you're an expert in, it's quite easy probably to be overwhelmed or just put off by asserting yourself in that kind of arena.
And I think just from maybe my perspective, given I came from a company that was over 100 years old, it had very specific policies, things like that. The tech industry and the startup world don't necessarily have them from the get-go as well, which I think may put women off slightly to say, well, they don't have what I need to support my career. But I found myself within a position at Vertice where I was having a very open conversation with leadership to say, like, this is going to be important to me in order for me to build a career here. So I think it's sometimes that initial thought to be like, oh, they don't have what I need to support me. But I think the way to approach it is they don't have it right now, because these companies are continuing to grow, they're continuing to develop, and unless there's women there to drive the right agenda for maternity leave, etc., then the voices aren't going to be heard.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you think it would be one of the more forward thinking, sort of ahead of the curve on this. So it's interesting that the way you describe that is as if we've still got to almost to negotiate to get things in place to make it more suitable. Can I just ask as well, and particularly Lily, you mentioned about being engaged with angels and investors early in your career, and again looking at some of the statistics, I think it said something like in 2022 women-founded businesses got 1.4% or 1.6% of all available funding, which seems ridiculous. So what is it that's kind of intrinsically holds the investors back from investing in female businesses, do you think?
I mean, where to begin?
Go.
I think it's an incredibly tough industry. And I think perhaps women of a certain age are perceived as maybe not being in it for the long run, on certain biological reasons. So I think that might cast some doubt. And then again, because of the way the industry is set up as being so fast paced, and if you are founding a business, it is your life. That might not be so attractive to some women as well, if they don't want to devote 24/7 to throwing yourself into something. And then the way that it's set up, I mean, the stories I've heard where female founders, there might be a business that is founded by a woman and a man, and the woman's leading the meeting, the question is only asked to men, or anything to do with maths is directed towards the male counterpart rather than the female. And I think because of the current setup in that kind of funding circle, it's quite alienating. I think it's much easier to become downtrodden or give up sooner than you would, than if people were really backing you and supporting you and asking you questions, encouraging you. Kind of like, oh, this is going to be tough, and don't worry, we'll just deal with your male counterpart, or don't worry, we'll just invest in this other business because they're not going to get pregnant, or their priorities aren't going to change. And I think there's still massive assumptions. There's one founder I follow on LinkedIn, and I'll try and find her name to share with you after this, who literally will take her baby to conferences and breastfeed on stage. She goes, I will do this. It's very difficult. She's very open about how difficult it is, but she's also very open with how committed she is to running a business.
Amazing. That's so inspiring.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's such a disconnect between, the whole tech space is so kind of progressive. It's, it's rapidly developing, all the rest of it. And yet the culture around the kind of the workforce is still a long way to go to catch up. And it kind of speaks to the point you mentioned, Jess, with more female leaders being prevalent in the industry, then with their voices being heard, things should start to change. But I guess, it's going to take a little while for that to happen.
Can we let's move on a little bit and talk about procurement specifically, so the role that you have within the organization. One of the things that I think would be really sort of interesting to get as a start point would be how you approach that in terms of defining success. What are you looking for? Is it all about money in that space in particular? What are the things that you at the table to achieve? How do you look at it?
So from my perspective, how I define success of a negotiation is really that win-win outcome. And that's something that we educate our customers on, right? Because the type of software that we are negotiating could be absolutely integral to their operations. It could be if it was a bad relationship, or if it was turned off for some reason because a deal couldn't have been met, then it's disastrous to their business. So what we try to educate and what we deem as successful is really that win-win outcome. So what I mean by that is not only focusing on that saving number, just that price, but also looking at it from a partnership perspective or a product perspective, and even innovation, because you really want to have a partner that you can be successful with within your own business and really grow your business as well. So it could be even from a cash flow or payment terms perspective, right? That's not exactly just the price, but it's thinking about how you can get to an outcome that ultimately will help your business achieve what it needs to.
And do you find that you said you educate clients on that? Do you find sort of a huge span of difference around that? There's some people like, I hear all that, but get me the best price, or what kind of do you encounter?
Yeah, definitely. I think it depends on, I suppose, the state of the businesses that we're working with as well, kind of what their main goal is right now, because what we offer is also visibility. So that's the kind of main factor that we want to drive in as well, to say, look, we're giving you visibility across all your spend. Let's use that as level one, and then let's look at the price. Let's look at your contracts. Let's understand what strategy to use, because you have all your contracts expiring at the end of the year or something like that. So it's about that holistic picture rather than just driving that price, and really kind of bringing to the table expertise, which basically allows a customer to agree with you.
I understand.
Can I just ask you, there's not a lot of people doing what Vertice do, is that right?
There aren't a huge amount of businesses doing this.
So
No.
is it a difficult sell? Is it difficult to get clients to engage? Are they kind of like, well, we've managed so far, we'll maybe think about it in 10 years' time, but for now we're okay?
I think what's interesting about our role in particular is, and I think procurement in general, but being an outsider in procurement, is you touch so many areas of the business. You meet everyone. So you might have people who are like, amazing, thank you, please take this off my plate. Very easy to get them on board with strategy, very collaborative. And then you'll have some people who are like, well, I'm really good friends with that account manager and we have lunch once a month. I don't want to upset them. And I don't, so you're really going on a journey with each person. So it's not even per customer, so to speak, but really per head of that owns contracts. And I think one thing to kind of add on what Jess said is I always try and look at that is something fit for purpose long term. And I try and get people to think about, next year. And because a SaaS stack is a bit like a puzzle, it's well, actually, maybe we take a shorter term contract with these people because from what I've heard, you're not sure or you're not comfortable. And maybe we take a hit this year on price, but next year you can move on, or you can double down once you know better. And so it's about not only in the negotiations, but also mapping out the whole category of tools that they're taking care of making sure that they're making the best decision for them. So I think once you get buy-in on a long-term plan, be a bit more creative when it comes to the negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because it strikes me so far, we're mainly discussing in a way is your negotiations with your clients as to how to manage their expectations and how they want to manage their strategy and their thinking. And in terms of then the negotiations with the suppliers of SaaS, what kind of sort of approaches do you take with those?
So I really try and look at who's in front of me and understand how they react to me, because again, we're a third party. So most people are a bit like, who are you? So you have to do a bit of explanation of who we are before we can then actually dive into the negotiation. But then I really just try and understand what they need from the outcome before we then address, okay, what do I need? So I try and get to know them, maybe their body language, their background, their culture, so that we're applying the right kind of framework. I think, sometimes there are times that it's more appropriate to be firm and less open. And then other times where, maybe we'll spend 10 minutes catching up about how they've been, what's going on at home, so that there's the right kind of atmosphere to negotiate within. And I think once that's been established, the conversations after that are quite straightforward.
So there's a lot of emotional intelligence going on there in your interactions with potential clients.
I get home from work and I don't want to talk to anyone.
And how about more aggressive, or do you ever deal with kind of highly emotional people? And if so, how do you handle that when you're negotiating?
So I think from my perspective, I think it can depend rep to rep that we work with across even the same suppliers, to be honest with you. And within, I suppose, SaaS purchasing, it could be that the rep hasn't hit their target for the month or the quarter, right? So then they may be heightened and the experience may not be as great as we want it to be. So it really kind of depends on the person, which can lead to them being more aggressive. But for me, it's really about just bringing it back to the facts, right? Let's take the emotion out of it. Let's go through what's in black and white. What's the usage? how great is your service? I've heard that you haven't given them the support or fixed their tickets in the last 3 months. So what's going on here? Let's really kind of like channel the emotion into the actual facts rather than more, I suppose, the qualitative feeling and emotion of how you think the relationship's going. And then really, I think that allows to kind of diffuse situations, because you're like, look, I'm not coming at you, I'm coming at the service. So let's take that emotion out of it and let's think how we can actually walk away satisfied here together.
I actually had a scenario once on the phone with this supplier, and he was just laughing at me. And I just cut him off and I said, look, I don't think you're in the right headspace to be speaking to me right now. I don't think you've received this very well. Let's just stop speaking for now, and maybe we'll speak in a couple of days. And he called me back an hour later and apologized. I just said, I'm not having a conversation of this tone. And I think knowing when to walk away and then pick up conversations is also quite valuable, because otherwise everybody gets upset.
That's good advice, isn't it? You know, if it's not working, you're disrespected, then just calling it out and walking away.
It's interesting also, sometimes exactly what you chose to do. Sometimes people actually, it's almost it's a panic response, that kind of laughing and nervousness. So actually, back to Anne's point about emotional intelligence, I think taking a break and suggesting that we regroup gave them enough time to process that, to be able to come back in a more reasonable space. And one of the things we talk about a lot is just that ability to not feel you must kind of keep pushing on regardless, and taking a step back can be the most powerful thing that you can do. So stuff.
So we have a quick fire round where we just want to ask you some questions, just to get your responses and get a bit of insight into your approach and your preferences when it comes to negotiating. So, long-term relationships or one-off transactions, which do you prefer?
Long-term.
One-off is more fun.
And why is it more fun, do you think, Lily?
Because you can be more creative, there's less to lose.
Interesting. And what do you prefer about long-term, Jess?
So I would probably say the same answer, but for the long term. So I find with if we're negotiating 3 or 5 year contracts, and you can really throw a lot into that negotiation, because the supplier on the other side knows that they're getting a relationship for that length of time as well. So yeah, creativity with that too.
Interesting. And which are you naturally, a poker face or an expressive face?
I'm expressive.
Me too.
And for you, how would you define your kind of, what about your worst negotiation? Was it bad because of the outcome or the process? And what did you learn?
I think one of my worst was a software negotiation, where the vendor had changed the pricing model, was completely opaque with how they'd got to that price, not willing to really move on their side. I'd worked out some calculations and said that it should be this, and then they came back and said, basically, computer says no, this is how our internal calculator works, and this is the price, and this is the difference. So I found myself at loggerheads. I think I tried everything under the sun, and it was a sizable contract, so wanted to make sure that we did throw everything at it. But in the end, the vendor increased the prices. But I would say that that's probably one of my worst kind of process negotiations. But the customer was so satisfied with what I did. They were like, Jess, we watched the whole thing. We saw that you really went to bat for us. You were really trying to work with the vendor in order to get that outcome for both of us. But the vendor was basically willing to damage the relationship because they know that they're one of the best on the street as well out there. So they were willing to be as firm as possible. But what I did do is, by doing my own calculations and really diving into it, I was able to save the customer on overages rather than moving to a new plan too early. So although the process was probably my worst and most frustrating one, there's always a bit of a silver lining too.
Brilliant. And how about you, Lily?
one's just come to mind. I was thinking of work-related stuff, but actually this was like years ago in Indonesia. I wanted to buy a t-shirt. I loved it. And I tried to negotiate, and I was like, I'll pay this much. No. And I had no experience at this point. I was like, how about this much? And he was like, no. Right, that's it. I'm not taking it. And I stormed it off. And I went back half an hour later and I gave him the full price.
I was going to say he chased after you instead of
between my legs.
Yeah. See, the beauty of that, Lily, it was a one-off transaction, so you never have to see them again. That's why.
Yeah.
And then I was mortified. I still wear the t-shirt 6 years later. So.
Well, it's a win. We probably just got an insight into this, but for both of you, what would you describe your natural style as? Would you say it was cooperative, or would it be more competitive?
I'm definitely cooperative, and I will continue to be and try to be cooperative throughout a negotiation. But then if I need to pull a card a bit more competitive at the end, then I'll do that. But I try to be as cooperative as possible.
Yeah, I understand. Makes perfect sense. Lily, what do you think?
I'd say I'm naturally more cooperative as a default.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, competitive when need be.
Unless it's clothing based, in which case
I need to win.
100%.
Yeah.
Right. And what would you say you prefer in terms of, as you described there, negotiating solo or negotiating it in a team? What do you prefer?
So I like to negotiate solo, but I'd caveat that because I love helping my team in the background. So I love having that kind of session, that prep session, really understand what the team are thinking and to help guide them. So I love doing that from the background and seeing them thrive. But when I'm on my own, I think a bit more solo because sometimes I may want to throw a curveball, and I try to prep as much as possible, but sometimes you need to think on your feet. So
yeah, very much so. Lily?
I love a two-seated negotiation. I find it quite fun. Working with a member of my team a couple of weeks ago. She was leading the call and I was listening, and you can read people's facial expressions when something's brought up. So I sent her a message and I said, ask him about that again. And then his eyes lit up again, and we kind of got more to where we needed to be. So I get a lot of satisfaction. And then quite often if the team are free, I'll say, can you go to that call with them and just sit there? Because I was like, the supplier's bringing 6 people. We should bring 3. And even if you don't do anything, just sit there. It tends to add a little bit more weight. So I quite enjoy it.
Great. Very much. And here's a final, completely random question. Working at home, silence or music?
Music. I think when I was studying for exams when I was younger, I would have to be around people or in the kitchen. So I love noise.
Right. Okay.
Me
Lily?
too.
Do you?
Noise the better.
Really? Interesting.
Right. What about you? Are you music or silence?
Oh, I want silence. I don't like noise.
Annabelle, what about you?
I try to listen to music, but I can't tune it out enough. I hear all the lyrics loud and clear, and I can't do it. So
I need complete silence, even if the dog's snoring in the background, which she is just now. It's rough. I find it really distracting.
I've had music playing and I accidentally start typing the words of a song in the email. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, like that. Some emotion into that.
Get into trouble with that, Siobhan. Listen, Lily and Jess, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Just before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share with us, or any other thoughts that you think might be quite interesting for listeners? I'm thinking maybe young women considering doing what you're doing and kind of looking at you and thinking that's kind of where I want to be.
I would say negotiation probably needs a rebrand. I think when I was a younger woman, I always perceived it as something quite confrontational, something that makes people uncomfortable or that they wouldn't want to do or make other people uncomfortable. And I think reframing that alongside also kind of putting yourself into a workplace where people might be significantly older than you, you might be surrounded by men, is kind of being confident in yourself and that nothing's personal.
Yeah.
And you can negotiate in a way that is for everyone, and it doesn't need to be a scary word.
Yeah. So would that be, could it kind of sum that up by saying, viewing negotiating as a kind of a more collaborative win-win type process, and having the confidence to step outside of your comfort zone and, take on challenges that might be challenging. Yeah. And Jess, what about you? Closing thought.
I think probably to build on what Lily said, I think when I first started out in this role, it was very daunting to be face to face with somebody in order to really sometimes be on the back foot as well. But it's about just being creative, and that collaboration, I think, that really shines through, and that's the fun part of negotiation. I think one kind of, I suppose, other piece of advice is to be resilient. I think there were a lot of times where I wanted to probably give up, thinking, God, is this really right for me? And it will be tough in the beginning, but when you get your groove and you understand your style and you understand how you're going to work best, there'll be no stopping you. So just go for it.
Yeah. So creativity and resilience. And is it nice to have the support of each other in the workplace that you're in?
Definitely. And I think that that's something that's so important as well. Me and Lily kind of being those female leaders within the team, that we show women supporting women as well, and bigging each other up and making sure that we're there for each other. If we need to go have a quiet rant somewhere, that we also have that opportunity as well.
Once a week.
But it shows that there's room for women, right? Me and Lily are at the same level. There's not just one spot for one woman.
Yeah, good. Brilliant. Listen, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure that people will find that really, really interesting to listen to. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I would invite you to like it, to subscribe to our podcast so that you'll be made aware when we release a new one, and to share it with other people that you think might find it interesting. You can get the podcast from anywhere that you get your podcasts from. And if you have any questions, perhaps questions that you'd like us to put to Lily and Jess, or questions around for us as the Deal Divas, or topics that you'd like us to talk about on the podcast, please email us on deal.divas@scotwork.com, and we'd be delighted to pick up on anything. And if there's any questions for Jess and Lily, we will pass them on. But thank you very, very much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all the very best.
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.